My parents missed every big moment of my life for my sick brother. Then a cousin showed me texts proving they planned to derail my wedding too. That's when everything changed. You ever get to that point where you're staring at your own wedding guest list and realizing the people who should have loved you most have done nothing but let you down? That's where I was. Standing in a suit, holding a pen, and deciding that my parents and little brother wouldn't be there to watch me marry the woman I loved. Because for as long as I could remember, they only ever showed up for him. Growing up, I used to believe that love in a family was measured in moments, the big ones like birthdays, holidays, graduations, but also the little ones too, like who showed up when you scraped your knee or won a spelling bee. But in our house, all those moments got rewritten to revolve around Neil, my younger brother, and whatever version of sick he was pretending to be that day. I didn't realize it at the time. I was just a kid. But it started the night of my 11th birthday party when he faked an asthma attack over some balloons he claimed smelled weird. Mom and Dad packed him into the car before I could blow out my candles, and by the time they came back, the cake was melted and the guests were gone. That night was the first time I felt like a ghost at my own celebration. And the thing is, it never really stopped. At first, I tried to be understanding. He was younger. He was sick, or so they said. Asthma, anxiety, migraines. Every diagnosis that came through became the new sun in our family's universe. And we were all expected to orbit around Neil. I spent years being told to be mature, to be patient, to let things go because your brother's not feeling well. They missed my band concerts, forgot my soccer championship, and were always too preoccupied to notice when I pulled straight A's or landed a part-time job at 16. I used to hang my achievements on the fridge, hoping they'd see them and say something. I'd wait until after dinner when the dishes were done, and I'd casually bring up a test I aced or a project that won a school award, but it always got derailed. Neil would start coughing or get pale, and suddenly, I was just background noise again. The worst was high school graduation. I was class president. I worked my ass off to earn that speech spot, and I still remember stepping up to the podium, heart pounding, scanning the crowd for my family, and finding empty seats. Turns out Neil was having a panic attack at home about a math final he hadn't even taken yet. My parents said they couldn't leave him like that, so they missed what should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. And somehow, every time I swallowed the disappointment, every time I told myself next time would be different. But it never was. By the time I met Jamie, I had built my life on the idea that I couldn't count on anyone but myself. She came from a family that actually showed up for one another, loud, warm, and unapologetically supportive. Her dad once drove 3 hours just to attend a 5-minute presentation I gave at a research expo. Her mom mailed me soup when I got sick. It was the kind of love I never believed was real until I saw it firsthand. Jamie's family loved me like I had always dreamed mine would. So when she proposed and we started planning the wedding, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. The idea of my parents being there, of Neil being there, just didn't sit right. I could already see it. Neil clutching his stomach in the middle of our vows, my mom crying over his imaginary flare-up while I stood there, once again, invisible on my own damn day. We tried to talk ourselves out of it at first. Maybe they'll behave, Jamie said once. But deep down, I knew better. I'd watched them bail on every important day of my life for the sake of my brother's ever-shifting list of medical mysteries. Why would my wedding be any different? That's when I made the call. I wrote their names down on a post-it note, stared at it for a long time, then crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. They weren't coming. I didn't expect the guilt to hit as hard as it did. I spent weeks second-guessing myself, lying awake at night wondering if I was being cruel. But when I pictured them sitting in those seats, knowing they were only there because I gave them permission, not because they earned it, I knew it would poison the whole day. I'd spent my life making room for their excuses. I wasn't going to make room for one more. We had a beautiful, intimate wedding. 80 guests, laughter, dancing, speeches that made me cry in a way I hadn't cried since I was a kid. Her dad gave me away. Her mom helped me straighten my tie. Her sisters toasted me like I'd been one of them forever. And for once, I felt seen. But, of course, nothing stays quiet for long. A cousin posted a few pictures online, and within hours, my phone was lighting up with texts from my mother. Accusations. Guilt trips. "You've always resented your brother," she wrote. This was unforgivable. What she didn't know, what I didn't know until a week later, was that Neil had told someone the truth. He wasn't sick. Not really. He never had been. He just liked the attention. And that's when the ground beneath me finally cracked. You spend your whole life thinking maybe you're the problem. Maybe you're too sensitive, too jealous, too needy because your family tells you in 1,000 subtle ways that you're always second for a reason. But when I found out Neil had been faking it all, playing puppet master while I bent myself into silence for years, it was like someone finally pulled the curtain back, and I saw the entire performance for what it was. It came from Kay, one of our cousins on my mom's side. Kay's always been quiet, more of an observer at family gatherings than a participant, but she was one of the few people who ever looked at me with anything close to sympathy. She called me up a week after the wedding, said she needed to talk, and we met for coffee at a little place near where Jamie and I lived. I thought maybe she wanted to talk about the drama or say she thought I was harsh for not inviting my folks. But the moment I sat down, she leaned across the table and said, "You were right not to invite them. There's something you need to know." She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of texts. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at. Then I saw my mom's name at the top of the screen and started reading. The texts were from the week before the wedding. In them, my mother talked about creating a distraction, worried Neil might feel overwhelmed by the attention I'd be getting. She mentioned possibly making him unwell during the ceremony to remind everyone of what really matters. I stared at the screen for a long time, my hands clenched so tightly around my coffee cup that my knuckles went white. There it was. Proof. Not just negligence. Not just favoritism. A deliberate, premeditated plan to derail my wedding. That should have been the end of it. Should have broken me. But then Kay said, "That's not all. You remember that 4th of July when you were 15 and Neil twisted his ankle so bad your parents made you cancel your choir solo at the town event?" I nodded. I'd been rehearsing that piece for weeks. She went on. "He told me the truth that night. We were in the backyard, he'd had a couple of beers he wasn't supposed to have, and he admitted he made it up. Said he couldn't stand the idea of you being the center of attention. It felt like every lie my family had ever told me was suddenly screaming in my ears. I thought back to all those missed birthdays, those forgotten holidays, the solo wins no one clapped for but me. I thought about my high school science scholarship, the one I had to turn down because Neil was having a respiratory emergency the week before the program started. Even though he was healthy enough to go camping with his friends a day later. It wasn't just about me being ignored. It was about me being erased. Jamie saw it all over my face when I came home from that coffee shop. I told her everything, piece by piece, trying not to shake. She didn't say much, just wrapped her arms around me and let me sit there in the silence. After a while, she whispered, "You always thought you were crazy for feeling forgotten. You weren't. You were gaslit. For years." I kept playing those texts from my mom over in my mind, imagining her planning some scene with Neil during the most important moment of my life. What kind of mother does that? What kind of family sees their son's petty jealousy and not only excuses it, but feeds it like it's normal? I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted space. I muted every message from my parents, every guilt-ridden voicemail, every cousin who chimed in without knowing the full story. I was done defending myself. I was done bleeding for a family that wouldn't even show up to watch me heal. And then, out of nowhere, Neil emailed me. It was long, apologetic, meandering. He said he was in therapy, claimed he had started realizing how messed up things were, said he'd seen Kay's screenshots and that it made him physically sick. He admitted he'd exaggerated symptoms, manipulated moments, and stole the spotlight every time he saw it drifting toward me. Not because he hated me, he wrote, but because he was terrified I'd outshine him. I sat there reading it, trying to match the words on the screen with the kid who ate my birthday cake in a hospital waiting room he didn't need to be in. The kid who once ruined my homecoming because of abdominal pain that turned out to be nothing but gas. The brother who never once said, "Congratulations," when I graduated with honors or landed a research job right out of grad school. And now this brother was saying he was sorry. I wasn't ready to reply. I needed time, but something shifted in me that day. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but something like clarity. I realized the problem had never just been Neil. The real betrayal was that our parents let it happen. They shaped him into the storm that flooded every milestone I tried to reach. And when the damage was done, they told me to mop it up and be grateful I was strong enough to handle it. They weren't just complicit. They were architects. After reading Neil's email, I didn't reply. Not immediately. I sat on it for days, maybe longer than I should have, rereading every line with a different emotion each time: anger, disbelief, sadness, something like cautious empathy. Because as much as I hated what he did, part of me kept going back to one question I didn't want to admit I was asking: was he just a product of them? The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If the only time your parents light up is when you're sick or struggling, and the rest of the time they're distracted or distant, you learn real fast what gets you love. Neil figured out early that being fragile got him hugs, attention, excuses, and a pass on every responsibility. And me? I figured out that being strong, being invisible, meant no one had to worry about me. That was my role. Be the stable one. The background one. The one who clapped for everyone else but never got clapped for. I finally wrote Neil back. Nothing dramatic. Just, I got your email. I need time. But thank you for saying what you did. I don't know if it was closure or the start of something else. But it felt necessary. And then, just when things seemed like they were calming down, my dad left a voicemail I'll never forget. His voice was low and deliberate, meant to sound composed, but I could hear the sharp edge under every word. "You've torn this family apart," he said. "You humiliated us. Neil's in the hospital now because of the stress you caused. A real daughter wouldn't do this." I didn't even listen to the rest. I just deleted it. Because here's the thing, I already knew Neil wasn't in the hospital. Kay had seen him at a baseball game that same day, laughing in the stands with a beer in his hand. The only stress he was experiencing was having to face the truth for once. And yet, my parents went back to their default setting: make it about Neil, make me the villain. It was a rerun of every moment in our past, only this time I wasn't buying the script. That night, Jamie and I sat on the porch of our apartment, sipping tea and watching the sun go down like we always did when we needed to sort through the heavy stuff. She looked over at me and said, "You've been carrying this your whole life, haven't you?" I nodded. "Yeah. And it's like the more I unpack it, the heavier it gets." "How does that make sense?" She just smiled in that quiet way she does when she knows I'm not looking for answers, just someone to hear me. "Because now you're finally acknowledging it," she said. "Before, you had to pretend it wasn't there." I realized she was right. All those years I tried to justify the missed events, the broken promises, the constant gaslighting. I trained myself to believe it was okay because Neil was sick. But now I knew the truth. And when the lie collapses, the weight of it all lands on you like bricks. Then came the kicker. Kay called again. She sounded nervous, like she was about to tell me something I wouldn't like, but she pushed through it anyway. "I found more texts," she said. "From your mom." She sent them to my mom, actually. "It's bad." Turns out, before they even knew they weren't invited to the wedding, my mom had been scheming. In the messages, she wrote about how worried she was that Neil would feel emotionally unsupported during a day that focused on me. She floated the idea of staging something, anything, to redirect attention. She talked about how she could lean into Neil's anxiety if he wasn't up for making a scene himself. It was chilling. I'd always feared that if they came to my wedding, they'd make it about Neil somehow. But this was confirmation that they were planning it. Plotting it. Like a sabotage mission wrapped in family concern. And that's when everything clicked for the extended family too. Kay started showing those texts to the relatives who'd criticized me after the wedding, the ones who had sent messages asking why I was being so harsh to my parents. One by one, the apologies started rolling in. An uncle. A cousin. Even an aunt who'd once scolded me at Christmas for not being more forgiving admitted she'd seen the pattern all along. Suddenly, it wasn't just my word against theirs anymore. There were receipts. There was context. One of the hardest things about family trauma is that it often hides in the quiet moments, the things that don't seem like abuse but build up over time like sediment. But now I had proof that this wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just favoritism. It was orchestrated erasure. And somehow that made it both more painful and easier to move forward. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being petty. I wasn't overreacting. I was finally seeing my childhood with honest eyes. Jamie's mom, a pediatric nurse for over 30 years, called my mom once, trying to open a dialogue, to maybe find some middle ground. She gently pointed out the inconsistencies in Neil's supposed health issues, how his lifestyle didn't line up with someone chronically ill. My mom hung up on her. Then she called Jamie's sister to complain about the meddling. That same week, Jamie's dad pulled me aside during a family dinner. He raised his glass and gave a short toast. To my son-in-law, he said, smiling, for making it here, and for never letting the weight of other people's shadows dim your light. I barely held it together, because finally, I wasn't invisible. It's a strange thing when validation finally shows up after a lifetime of silence. I thought it would feel like vindication, like triumph, but instead, it felt like grief. A deep, hollow kind of mourning for everything I'd lost growing up. The birthdays I celebrated alone, the applause I never got, the shoulder I needed that never showed up. Knowing the truth didn't fix those memories. It just made them heavier. What hit me hardest wasn't just realizing my parents had always picked Neil. It was realizing how normal I'd let that become. I had learned to shrink my joy, mute my pain, and dim myself down to a version that made room for his problems. Even when I excelled, I did it quietly. Even when I struggled, I did it alone. I guess you could say I became the kind of man who never asked for help because I knew help would never come. So when Kay showed me those last few messages, my mother literally planning to stage a disruption on my wedding day, it didn't just make me angry. It made me see my entire childhood with a clarity I never had before. Every missing chair at every ceremony. Every gift that was never bought. Every time they said, "We wish we could have been there," but Neil wasn't feeling well. They weren't passive victims of Neil's manipulation. They were participants. When I told Jamie everything, about the staged illness plan, about Kay's confirmation, about the relatives slowly walking back their judgments, she didn't say much. Just pulled me into her arms and let me sit in the quiet. That kind of stillness, the kind that lets a man breathe for the first time in decades. That's what love looks like. Not the grand gestures, just someone who holds the space when the walls fall in. A few days later, Neil reached out again. This time, it wasn't an apology. It was silence. He didn't say anything new, didn't reply to my message. Kay said he got defensive after she confronted him. Accused her of turning on him, of choosing sides, of betraying family. I wasn't surprised. Guilt and shame can twist a man into 1,000 shapes. And I knew enough about our upbringing to understand that facing what he'd done would mean admitting that our parents were never as good as he wanted to believe. Still, I waited. A small part of me hoped he'd step up, that he'd say the words I'd needed since we were kids. But all I got was radio silence. Meanwhile, my parents were still spinning the story their way. They called it a family emergency when people asked why they weren't at the wedding. Claimed I had a vendetta. Told anyone who'd listen that I was mentally unwell and lashing out because of resentment. But the more they pushed that narrative, the more people started to see the cracks. Jamie's mom, after that shutdown phone call from my mother, started telling her side to a few family members. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Neil's Instagram full of hiking photos, sports games, late-night bar crawls. His race bib from a recent 10K. His weekend canoe trip up north. She laid it out like a medical chart, and people started doing the math. Even the ones who had stood by my parents started backing away. Then came the phone call from my aunt, my mom's older sister. She said she felt torn, like she should have spoken up years ago but didn't want to rock the boat. She apologized for staying quiet. Told me she remembered specific moments, like that family reunion when I announced a major promotion, and my mom cut me off mid-sentence to brag about Neil getting a part-time job at a grocery store. She said it always made her uncomfortable, but she assumed it was just the way your mom shows love. Now, with everything coming out, she said it felt more like something else, something darker. Not just favoritism, manipulation, control, narcissism. Words I never used for my parents because I didn't want to believe they fit. But maybe they did. The most surreal moment came at a dinner Jamie's family hosted a week after the wedding. They invited a few people who couldn't make the ceremony, just a laid-back evening with food and laughter. At one point, Jamie's dad stood up and tapped his glass. "I just want to say," he said, looking around the table, "how proud we are to have this man as part of our family. He's not just brilliant, he's resilient. And that kind of strength doesn't come from ease. It comes from hardship. And rising anyway." Everyone clapped. And I cried. Not because of the praise, but because I realized that was the first time anyone had ever toasted me in my life. Not for what I could do for someone else. Not for surviving Neil's shadow. But just for being me. I kept thinking about the first time I ever brought Jamie home to meet my parents. How cold my mom had been. How disinterested Neil acted. How my dad said something like, "She seems nice. But you've always picked women who like the spotlight. Be careful." Looking back, it wasn't about Jamie at all. It was about the fear that someone might finally see me. Now, sitting in that warm room, surrounded by people who chose to love me, who showed up without needing anything in return, I finally let go of the version of family I spent my whole life chasing. I realized something I'd been afraid to admit for years. Just because someone shares your blood doesn't mean they deserve your loyalty. Sometimes, the family you build is the only family worth keeping. It was late one night, maybe close to midnight, when the email came through. I had just gotten out of the shower, towel slung around my neck, phone lighting up on the bathroom counter like it had a secret it couldn't wait to spill. I tapped the screen and there it was, Neil. Subject line: "I owe you more than an apology." I sat down on the edge of the bed, heart thudding, unsure if I even wanted to open it. But I did. And man, I wasn't ready for what was inside. The email was long, rambling in some parts, sharp in others. But it was real. Raw. I could feel his guilt dripping through every sentence like he was trying to bleed it out of his system. He started by saying he didn't expect forgiveness, that he wasn't even sure if he deserved a response, but that if I was willing to read, he wanted to say what he should have said a long time ago. He admitted it all: every fake illness, every timed flare-up, every sabotage disguised as a crisis. He confessed to faking an anxiety attack during my high school graduation because he overheard my parents praising my speech and couldn't stand the idea of not being needed. He said the homecoming stomach pain? Faked. The urgent care visit on my 16th birthday? Just allergies. Even the infamous asthma incident at my piano recital? He said he was fine. Just didn't like that I was getting attention. What got me most, though, was this line: "I didn't realize until therapy that I wasn't just stealing your spotlight, I was stealing your sense of worth." That hit harder than anything he could have said. Because yeah, he was right. When you grow up being told your milestones matter less than someone else's discomfort, you stop celebrating yourself. You start to believe you're selfish for even wanting recognition. He told me that therapy had opened his eyes to a lot of things, not just about me, but about himself. That he'd built his identity around being fragile because that's when mom and dad paid attention. That he knew deep down he was faking it, but the attention felt so good, so needed, he convinced himself he might be sick. That maybe if he believed it just enough, it wasn't really lying. But the part that really tore something loose in me? He said he read through all the family texts, including the ones where mom plotted to sabotage the wedding. He said when he saw it, he felt sick. Not just because it proved the dysfunction ran deeper than he wanted to admit, but because, for the first time, he realized how far our mother was willing to go to protect the illusion of his fragility, even if it meant ruining the happiest day of my life. He ended by saying this: "You always carried more than your share, and I took advantage of that. I let you take the hits, the silence, the invisibility, and I never said thank you, never said sorry. I don't expect to be your brother again. But if you ever want to talk, really talk, I'll be here." I sat there staring at the screen, unsure what I was even feeling. There was no one emotion, just a storm of memories crashing into each other, all lit up by the spotlight of truth. I showed it to Jamie. She read it in silence, then nodded slowly. "He's doing the work," she said. "That's more than your parents have ever done." And she was right. Because while Neil had confessed, taken ownership, even started therapy to face what he'd done, my parents, they doubled down. The next day, Jamie forwarded me a voicemail she got from my mom because I'd already blocked her. Her voice cracked like she'd been crying for hours, but even in her sadness, it was all about blame. "Neil's in a bad place," she said. "And it's your husband's fault. All this drama, it's pushed him over the edge. You need to talk some sense into him before he tears this family apart." That was her angle. Still, no mention of the texts she sent plotting to derail my wedding. No mention of the years she let my achievements collect dust while Neil's sniffle got a parade. Just the same manipulative playbook, emotional blackmail dressed up as concern. Jamie didn't respond. She didn't need to. We both knew what this was. But later that week, something unexpected happened. Neil told our parents he'd apologized. Apparently, he left his email account open on their shared home computer while visiting. My mom found the draft, read it, and lost it. He said she screamed at him, accused him of being manipulated, of betraying the family. My dad threatened to cut off his financial support if he didn't take it back. Neil's living in an apartment they pay for, drives a car they bought, works part-time at a startup run by one of his friends that barely breaks even. My parents made it clear: stand by your brother or stand on your own. And for the first time in his life, he chose to stand on his own. He told me he was looking for full-time work, planning to move into a smaller place, trade in the car, and finally break away. He said he didn't want to be a man funded by lies anymore. That got to me. Because maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to understand what it felt like to carry your own weight without someone else clearing the road for you. I haven't decided if I want to meet him yet. He offered to grab coffee. I told him I'd think about it. For now, Jamie and I are focused on our next chapter. She got a job offer in Boston. I got one from a biotech firm that feels like the perfect fit. We're moving next month, starting fresh in a city that knows nothing about our pasts. We've told almost no one, not my parents, not even most of our extended family. Just Jamie's folks, a couple of close friends, and Kay, who cried when I told her. You deserve a clean slate, she said. You really do. And I think maybe she's right. It was the knock at the door that reminded me some ghosts don't disappear when you stop feeding them, they just learn how to wear new faces. I wasn't expecting anyone. Jamie wasn't either. We just finished unpacking the last of the moving boxes and were settling into our Friday night routine, her with a blanket and a book, me sipping coffee and watching the Sox game with half an eye. But then came that knock. Slow. Intentional. Like whoever was on the other side wasn't just delivering a package, they wanted to be seen. Jamie looked at me, eyebrows raised. I shrugged, stood up, and walked over. There he was. My father. Standing in the hallway of our new Boston apartment like he'd been invited. Like the past year hadn't happened. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner. The sharp edge of arrogance dulled by something I couldn't quite name, maybe desperation, maybe shame. He didn't say anything at first, just held a manila envelope in his hand like it was some kind of peace offering. I didn't move. Didn't speak. You look good, he finally said. His voice cracked slightly like he hadn't practiced the words before saying them. I nodded once. Nothing more. He offered the envelope. This is everything you might need if you ever want to fix things. I didn't take it. I didn't even glance at it. Because I already knew there was no fixing the kind of damage that spans decades and grows roots deep into your foundation. There's only removal, reconstruction, and peace if you're lucky. I'm not interested, I said. He flinched just a little. Your mother, she's not doing well. Neither was I said. For about 20 years. He sighed, looked down at his shoes like the floor might open up and swallow him if he stared long enough. Neil's doing better, he said. He told us he reached out to you. That you might talk. I folded my arms. Neil's trying. You're not. He tried to protest, tried to say something about misunderstandings, about how they were just trying to support their son. But I stopped him. You weren't supporting a sick child, I said. You were enabling a liar. And in the process, you abandoned another son who was begging to be seen. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I stepped forward, not angry, not emotional, just steady. You don't get to knock on my door now and act like this is a misunderstanding. You don't get to skip the hard parts. If you want to change, start with the truth. Say it out loud. Say you failed me. He stared at me like I'd just asked him to saw off his own leg. And then, with the smallest voice I'd ever heard from the man who used to shout me into silence, he said, I don't know how. I nodded. That's not my problem anymore. And I closed the door. Not with a slam. Just a quiet click. Final. Clean. Jamie walked over, didn't ask questions. She just reached for my hand and sat beside me on the couch. We didn't talk about it that night. We didn't need to. The silence between us was the kind that healed, not the kind that once suffocated me. Later, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not to them. To myself. A kind of letter I never thought I'd write. One that said, you were not wrong. You were never too sensitive. You were never imagining it. They just weren't willing to love you in the way you needed. And that's not your fault. It was the first time I ever spoke to my younger self with kindness instead of critique. The first time I looked at the boy who clapped for himself after a solo, who went to homecoming alone, who packed his own lunch while Neil laid on the couch faking stomach pain and told him he mattered. A week later, a letter came in the mail from Neil. Not an email. A real, handwritten letter. He said he'd moved into a new place, was budgeting for the first time, cooking his own meals. He said therapy was still rough, but that he'd stopped lying to his therapist and to himself. He ended the letter with this. I hope you're happy. I hope you have peace. And if I ever get the chance to be your brother for real, I'll earn it this time. I haven't written back yet, but I didn't throw the letter away. It's sitting in my desk drawer between my wedding photos and a copy of my first published research paper, the kind of accomplishments I used to hide because no one cared enough to see them. Except now I do. And that's enough. I never imagined peace would look like this: quiet mornings without a phone vibrating on the nightstand, with guilt trips, long walks through the city with Jamie where I'm not looking over my shoulder for some kind of emotional ambush, and laughter, real laughter, echoing through our apartment like it's always belonged there. Not borrowed. Not contingent on someone else's crisis. Ours. Earned. A few weeks after my father showed up, I got a call from Kay. "You'll want to hear this," she said. Apparently, word had gotten out that Neil had officially cut financial ties with our parents. He'd moved out of their apartment, dropped their insurance plan, and even unfriended them on social media, which for our family was akin to lighting the family tree on fire. They were telling anyone who would listen that I corrupted him, that Boston had filled his head with radical independence. My mother, in her usual dramatic fashion, claimed she didn't recognize her sons anymore. But I knew the truth. For the first time, they were seeing us clearly. And they couldn't stand it. Kay told me Neil had started spending time with her more regularly. They weren't best friends, not yet, but he was opening up. He'd told her about the letter he sent me. That he didn't expect an answer, but he hoped it brought me some peace. It had. Not because it fixed anything, but because it proved I wasn't the only one trying to break the cycle. That someone else had stepped out of the dysfunction and was trying, in his own way, to build something new. Something honest. The funny thing about healing is it doesn't always show up as big revelations or cinematic moments. Sometimes it's the way Jamie squeezes my hand when she sees me getting quiet. Sometimes it's a call from a coworker saying, "Hey, I heard your name mentioned in a board meeting today." Sometimes it's just sitting in a cafe alone, drinking coffee without anxiety hanging off your shoulders like a wet coat. I'm not saying I'm whole. Not yet. Maybe never. But I'm not broken the way I was. A month after we got settled in Boston, Jamie planned a small dinner at our place. Just a handful of people, her family, a couple of friends from work, and Kay, who flew in as a surprise. Jamie brought out a cake, not for a birthday, not for an anniversary. Just because. Written in icing, it said, "To the man who chose himself." I lost it, because I never thought I'd be celebrated just for being me. Not for what I overcame, or endured, or managed to survive. But for the fact that I stood up one day and said no more. No more sacrificing my peace for people who weaponized love. No more dimming my light to keep someone else from feeling threatened. No more pretending that blood is a bond when it's been nothing but a leash. At the end of the night, as I stood in the kitchen washing dishes, Kay came up beside me, towel in hand. "Your mom's still spinning," she said. "She told Aunt Renee you were trying to replace the family with your wife's." I didn't even blink. Good. That means she knows I'm finally done. She laughed. "You know, it's funny. You used to look like someone always waiting to be picked." I looked at her. "And now? Now you look like someone who picked himself." That night, after everyone left and the dishes were done, Jamie and I sat on the fire escape with 2 glasses of wine and a blanket wrapped around our shoulders. The city buzzed below us, life moving on, people finding their way just like we had. I pulled out Neil's letter again. Read the last line one more time. "If I ever get the chance to be your brother for real, I'll earn it this time." I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just smiled. Because I finally understood something. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in. Sometimes forgiveness is just releasing the weight, setting it down so you can move forward, lighter, freer, and full of the life you were always meant to live. So here's what I know now. I didn't lose a family. I walked away from a lie. And in doing so, I found myself.